The year is 1945. World War II is nearing its brutal climax. Across the Pacific, the jungles of Southeast Asia echo with gunfire, blood, and the cries of dying men. But on one forgotten island off the coast of Burma, an island called Ramree, something far worse than bullets or bombs awaited a garrison of Japanese soldiers. Here, in the swampy mangroves, they stepped into a nightmare, a place where the water itself was alive, where eyes glowed in the darkness, and where the very ground seemed to drag men under. That night, nature unleashed its deadliest predator on humankind. Hundreds of soldiers entered the swamp. By morning, only silence remained, broken only by the sound of crocodiles feeding. This is not just a war story. This is the terrifying true tale of the Battle of Ramree Island, the night the crocodiles feasted on men. To understand the horror, we must first step back into history. It was January 1945. The Allies, Britain, India, and their Commonwealth forces were pushing hard against the Japanese Empire. The Japanese had occupied vast territories across Asia. But now, their empire was shrinking. One key point was Burma, modern-day Myanmar. Controlling Burma meant controlling supply routes, airfields, and access to the Indian Ocean. And off the coast of Burma lay Ramree Island, about 80 kilometers long, covered in dense jungle, mud, and mangrove swamps. The island was more than just wilderness. It was a strategic military base. Airfields on Ramree could control the skies over the Bay of Bengal. Whoever held Ramree could strike shipping routes and launch air raids. For the Japanese, holding the island was vital. For the British, capturing it was essential. And so, the stage was set for a bloody confrontation. On January 14, 1945, the British launched their assault. Warships thundered from the sea, blasting Japanese positions with artillery. Allied planes roared overhead, dropping bombs that shook the earth. Then, the Royal Marines and Indian soldiers advanced. The Japanese defenders fought fiercely. For days, gunfire rattled through the jungles. Grenades exploded among palm trees. Men screamed, bled, and fell into the mud. But slowly, the Allies pushed forward. The Japanese, though brave and determined, were cut off. Their supplies dwindled. Their lines crumbled. By the third week, the British had secured most of the island. Only one pocket of Japanese resistance remained, about 1,000 soldiers trapped in the northern swamps. And that's when the nightmare began. Cut off and surrounded, the Japanese had only one option: retreat through the mangroves. To them, it was just swamp, mud, trees, and water. But to the men of Ramree, those mangroves were death itself. Imagine wading waist-deep in black water, every step dragging you down. Mosquitoes swarm in clouds, so thick you can't see. The air stinks of rot and decay. You hear splashes, but you don't know if it's a fish or something else watching you. What the Japanese soldiers didn't realize was that Ramree's mangroves were infested with saltwater crocodiles, the largest, most aggressive reptiles on Earth. Saltwater crocodiles are not ordinary animals. They are living dinosaurs, survivors from 200 million years ago. They can grow up to 23 feet long. They can weigh more than a ton. Their jaws bite with a force of 3,700 pounds per square inch, stronger than a lion, stronger than a shark. Once they lock onto their prey, they drag it underwater in a terrifying move called the death roll, spinning violently, ripping flesh, breaking bones, until nothing remains but silence and blood in the water. And Ramree's swamps were home to thousands of these monsters. Now imagine 1,000 hungry crocodiles and 1,000 desperate soldiers. The stage was set for one of the most horrifying encounters in human history. As the Japanese entered the swamp, the sun fell. Darkness swallowed the mangroves. The water turned black. The air grew thick. At first it was quiet. Just the sound of boots in mud, soldiers whispering, the buzz of insects. Then came the splashes. A ripple here, a ripple there, eyes glowing, yellow, watching. The soldiers tensed, guns clutched, fingers on triggers, then suddenly chaos. A crocodile lunged from the water, jaws snapping shut on a man's leg. He screamed as the beast dragged him under. Gunfire erupted, muzzle flashes lighting the swamp. Soldiers fired wildly at the water, hitting nothing. Another man vanished, dragged screaming into the dark. Then another, and another. The swamp came alive with roars and splashes. Crocodiles lunged from every direction. Men fired, shouted, screamed, but in the pitch black, they could see nothing but eyes and teeth. British troops, watching from outside the swamp, later described the sounds as the most horrific noise ever heard. One British naturalist, Bruce Stanley Wright, recorded it. That night was the most horrible that any member of the crews ever experienced. The scattered rifle shots in the pitch-dark swamp, punctuated by the screams of wounded men crushed in the jaws of huge reptiles, and the occasional splash as crocodiles attacked, marked the end of the Japanese garrison. All night long, the swamp echoed with terror. Imagine being one of those soldiers. You are lost, surrounded by water. Every sound makes your heart race. You see shadows moving. You hear splashes nearby. You fire your rifle. But was it a crocodile or just water? You climb a tree, hoping to escape. But crocodiles wait below. They are patient. They know you must eventually come down. Some soldiers, delirious with fever and fear, drowned themselves rather than wait. Others were dragged away, screaming. The night became endless. Hours stretched like days. The swamp was filled with panic, gunfire, and the awful crunch of bones in crocodile jaws. By morning, the mangrove was silent. Only the ripples remained, and the crocodiles, bloated, slid back into the depths. As the first rays of sunlight pierced through the misty mangroves, the British soldiers who had surrounded the swamp finally dared to approach. What they saw and heard the previous night was already burned into their memories: the unending screams, the splashing of water, and the echoes of rifles firing blindly into the dark. Now, in the pale light of dawn, the scene was nothing short of hell itself. Corpses floated in the shallow waters, torn and broken, some missing limbs, others reduced to nothing more than scraps of uniform tangled in reeds. The mud was churned red, the water clouded with blood. Here and there, a crocodile's eyes still gleamed before sliding silently beneath the surface. Out of nearly 1,000 Japanese soldiers who had entered the swamp the previous night, only a fraction remained alive. Some were hiding in the trees, clinging desperately to branches, trembling, half mad from terror. Others stumbled out of the swamp, wounded and delirious, their bodies covered in leech bites, mosquito welts, and infected wounds. The Allies captured about 20 survivors. These men, starving and broken, told stories so horrifying that even hardened soldiers were shaken. They spoke of comrades vanishing in sudden splashes, of crocodiles ripping men apart in front of their eyes, of being trapped in pitch-black water surrounded by monsters. The swamp had become a slaughterhouse, and nature had done what bullets could not. The story of Ramree Island might have faded into obscurity, just another forgotten episode of a global war, if not for the chilling testimony of those who witnessed it. British soldiers stationed around the mangroves later recalled, "We heard cries all night, cries of men being dragged under. It wasn't the war we feared anymore, it was the swamp." Even after the gunfire stopped, the screams didn't. They went on, until suddenly, nothing. One British Marine described how he fired at shapes in the water, unsure whether he was hitting crocodiles or his own enemy. Another recalled how, at dawn, the silence was so complete that it felt as though the swamp itself had swallowed every sound, every soul. But perhaps the most chilling account came from Bruce Stanley Wright, a naturalist who accompanied the British forces. His words have since been quoted across history books. That night was the most horrible that any member of the ML crews ever experienced. The scattered rifle shots in the pitch-dark swamp, punctuated by the screams of wounded men crushed in the jaws of huge reptiles, and the occasional splash as crocodiles attacked, marked the end of the Japanese garrison. This wasn't just war. This was nature itself turning against man. To truly understand the scale of this nightmare, we must return to the predator at the center of it all, the saltwater crocodile. These creatures are apex predators, perfectly adapted to kill. For millions of years, they have dominated rivers, estuaries, and coastal swamps. Unlike sharks or lions, crocodiles are ambush hunters. They wait silently, completely still, their nostrils just above the surface, until the moment to strike arrives. When they attack, they unleash explosive speed. A crocodile can surge from the water faster than the eye can follow, snapping its jaws shut with bone-crushing power. And once it grabs, escape is impossible. Now picture not one crocodile, but hundreds. An entire swamp filled with these reptiles, their hunting instincts triggered by the movement, sound, and blood of nearly 1,000 men. It was not a battle. It was a feeding frenzy. The story of Ramree Island has become legendary. So much so that it earned a place in the Guinness Book of World Records as the greatest disaster suffered from animals. But with legends come questions. Some historians argue that the tale might have been exaggerated. Did hundreds of Japanese soldiers really die by crocodiles? Or was it mostly disease, dehydration, and starvation that killed them in the swamps? After all, the mangroves of Burma were filled with dangers beyond reptiles. Malaria-carrying mosquitoes, venomous snakes, quicksand-like mud, and exhaustion. Survivor numbers are uncertain. Some sources claim 500 to 900 men perished. Others suggest the crocodile attacks were real but not on such a massive scale. Yet even skeptics admit this. Crocodiles were there. Soldiers did die in the swamps, and the psychological terror was very real. The truth may lie somewhere in between, but to the men who lived through that night, there was no exaggeration. To them, the swamp was hell. The Battle of Ramree Island stands out in World War II not because of strategy or firepower, but because of the way nature itself became the executioner. In most battles, men fear bullets, bombs, and bayonets. But on Ramree, men faced something far more primal, the terror of being hunted and eaten alive. It was a reminder that no matter how advanced armies become, no matter how deadly their weapons, humans remain vulnerable to the raw, unstoppable power of the natural world. The Japanese soldiers who entered the mangroves believed they were escaping one enemy. Instead, they walked straight into the jaws of another, one that could not be negotiated with, one that knew no mercy. Today, Ramree Island is quiet. The mangroves still stretch across its coast. Crocodiles still lurk beneath the surface. But for those who know the story, the island carries an aura of dread. Local fishermen whisper warnings about venturing too deep into the swamps. Soldiers who fought there never forgot the sounds of that night. And historians still debate the numbers, but all agree on this. Ramree remains one of the most horrifying intersections of war and nature in recorded history. Documentaries, books, and survival shows continue to retell the story, each adding to its dark legend. And every retelling asks the same question. What is more terrifying, the cruelty of war, or the merciless jaws of nature's oldest predator? The story of Ramree forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. In war, men kill men, but sometimes men unleash forces they cannot control. By retreating into the swamps, the Japanese soldiers stepped into an environment where they were no longer soldiers, they were prey. The mangroves were not neutral ground. They belonged to the crocodiles. And nature defended its territory with silent patience and unstoppable violence. For the survivors, Ramree was not just a lost battle. It was a descent into madness, a night of unimaginable terror that blurred the line between history and nightmare. So what truly happened that night on Ramree Island? Were 500 soldiers really devoured by crocodiles? Or has the legend grown with time? We may never know the exact number. But one thing is certain. Those men entered the swamp, and very few returned. The rest became part of the jungle's dark secret, their cries echoing in history, their bones lost beneath the water, their fate a chilling reminder of man's fragility. And somewhere, even today, as the sun sets over Ramree, the crocodiles wait, silent, ancient, watching. Because in the end, On that forgotten island in 1945, it wasn't the war that decided their fate. It was nature, and nature never forgets. This was the story of the Battle of Ramree Island, where man met his end, not from bullets, but from the jaws of monsters older than time itself. A reminder that sometimes the deadliest battlefield is the one nature creates for us.